Welcome to the Microgreens World Podcast.
All right. Deep divers. Microgreens.
Mm-hmm.
These tiny vegetable, basically salads just waiting to happen, right?
Yeah.
They're popping up everywhere, from those fancy restaurants to like our own windowsills.
Right.
But, you're curious, and rightfully so, about the safety of these little greens.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're doing a deep dive today
Mm-hmm.
into an article from Microgreens World called Can Microgreens Make You Sick?
Okay.
Now, before you hit the panic button, the article itself is actually quite reassuring.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the core message that when grown and handled and processed correctly,
Right.
microgreens are just as safe as any other vegetable that we commonly eat.
Okay, that's good news for my avocado toast aspirations.
Absolutely.
But I'm guessing there's a little more to the story?
There always is, right?
Yeah.
So the article points out that there haven't even been any widespread cases of foodborne illness
Really?
that are directly linked to microgreens,
Interesting.
which is a good sign.
Yeah.
However, like any raw produce, there are potential risks to consider.
Like what could go wrong in the wonderful world of microgreens?
Well, bacterial contaminants like Salmonella, Listeria,
Sure.
these are a concern with any raw food,
Right.
and microgreens are no exception.
Of course. Yeah.
These bacteria can make their way onto produce through contaminated soil or water, or even during handling.
Okay, good old Salmonella, familiar territory.
Right.
But the article also mentioned something about fungi,
Yes,
and those names were a mouthful,
they were.
even for me.
Right. So we're talking Pythium and Phytophthora,
Yeah, those are rough.
which, for those of us who aren't botanists,
Right.
are basically types of fungi that can cause root rot and other plant diseases.
Root rot. Yeah, that doesn't sound very appetizing.
Not really.
Is this something we need to be worried about?
Thankfully, the article suggests that these fungal issues are more common in home-growing environments.
Oh.
Commercially grown microgreens are usually cultivated in, more controlled settings to minimize these risks.
Makes sense.
But this brings up an interesting point.
Go on.
The article spends a good deal of time on precautions for home growers.
Okay.
They even recommend things like sterilized containers and proper air circulation.
Huh.
It's almost as if they're anticipating a lot of people will be growing their own microgreens.
That's a really good observation. Why do you think they focus so much on home growing?
Well, there's a clue later in the article.
Okay.
It mentions that commercially sold microgreens often have a very short shelf life,
Right.
which means they're usually grown locally.
Sure.
So it's possible that home-growing microgreens is becoming more widespread than we realize.
That makes total sense. It's like farm to table,
Right.
but even smaller scale, more like windowsill to table or something.
Exactly. And while that's great for promoting fresh, local eating,
Sure.
it also means more people are directly involved in the growing process.
Right.
Which means understanding these potential risks is more important than ever.
Okay, so we've covered the bacteria and the funky fungi, but the article also mentioned something about toxins in microgreens.
Yes.
And that definitely caught my eye. Toxins in my tiny greens.
Yeah.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What kind of toxins are we talking about here?
Well, the article mentions a few usual suspects, but with some important caveats.
Okay.
First up is solanine.
Solanine.
Yeah, which is found in nightshade plants like tomatoes and potatoes.
Solanine. Doesn't ring a bell.
It's probably more familiar as that warning you've heard about not eating green potatoes.
Oh, right. Something about them being poisonous. Wait, but we eat ripe tomatoes all the time.
Right.
And they're technically a nightshade. Right.
Exactly. And that gets to the heart of it.
Right.
Yes, green potatoes and even the leaves and stems of tomato plants have higher levels of solanine,
Okay.
which can be toxic in large amounts.
Right.
But ripe tomatoes, perfectly fine.
Okay.
And the same goes for microgreens from nightshade plants.
Interesting.
They contain minuscule amounts of solanine.
So, like most things in life, it's the dose that makes the poison.
Precisely. It's all about perspective.
Right.
Take oxalic acid, for example.
Okay.
It's found in foods like spinach, rhubarb,
Sure.
even chocolate.
Huh. Really?
But just like with solanine, it's only a problem in extremely high doses.
So you're saying I don't have to ditch my spinach smoothies just yet?
Not at all. In fact, the article uses an excellent example.
Okay.
It says you'd have to eat something like 7 pounds of spinach in a single sitting
Wow.
to experience negative effects from oxalic acid.
7 pounds of spinach. Yeah, I think I'd be seeing green for a whole other reason at that point. Okay, so our bodies can handle these substances in small doses.
Right.
What was that last toxin? The one in buckwheat?
Right, that was phagopyrin.
Phagopyrin, okay.
And don't worry, your pancake breakfasts are safe. Buckwheat microgreens, like the mature grain, do contain trace amounts of this compound.
Okay.
However, it's such a small amount that it's highly unlikely to cause any harm.
Gotcha.
Again, dosage is key.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. It's fascinating, really. We hear these words like toxin and immediately freak out.
Right.
But we forget that these things exist naturally in so many foods we eat every day.
It's true. And our bodies have evolved to process them effectively in those small amounts.
Right.
It's when we get to those extremely high levels that problems can arise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that takes us back to something we discussed earlier, the importance of being aware of where our food comes from and how it's grown.
For sure.
Especially with more people exploring, home gardening these days.
Right. Because even though the article reassured us that commercial microgreens are typically grown in those controlled environments, those of us who are thinking of trying our hand at growing our own need to be extra vigilant about food safety.
Absolutely.
So what's the number one tip for us aspiring microgreen farmers?
Well, the article is pretty clear on that point. Washing is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, they really hammered that home.
Right.
Even if you buy microgreens that are labeled pre-washed, it's always a good idea to give them a rinse at home.
Okay, see, now you're speaking my language. I am a firm believer in washing all produce.
Right.
Even if the packaging says it's good to go, you never know.
Exactly.
What's happened on the journey from, farm to grocery store to my fridge.
Right. And let's be honest, a quick rinse is a small price to pay for peace of mind. Couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up our microgreen deep dive, I have to say I'm feeling much better about those little greens than when we started. What about you?
Me too. It's easy to get kind of swept up in the excitement of a new food trend, but taking the time to understand those potential risks and benefits is so important.
Absolutely. We've learned that microgreens, when grown and handled properly, are just as safe as any other vegetable. But we've also learned that with the rise of home growing, being informed about those potential risks, like the bacteria, the fungi, even those naturally occurring toxins, is key.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, washing our produce, non-negotiable. No excuses.
It's all about making those informed choices. And I think this deep dive highlighted something kind of crucial, that even these seemingly simple food choices can connect us to bigger conversations about, food systems, consumer awareness,
right,
and even our own relationship with the food we eat.
It really is. And that, my friend, is the beauty of a good deep dive.
There you go.
We started with a simple question. Are microgreens safe?
Yeah.
And we ended up exploring so much more. So to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has left you feeling empowered, informed, and maybe even a little bit inspired to start your own windowsill garden.
There you go.
Just remember to wash those microgreens.
Absolutely. Happy and healthy eating, everyone.
All right.